The classroom buzzed with the usual chatter of restless students, chairs scraping against the floor as the final bell rang. Mrs. Thompson, a kind but firm teacher, stood by her desk, straightening the papers she had brought from home for the day's lesson. She had been teaching for over 20 years, but even the most experienced educator could feel a twinge of unease when she saw the small group of notorious troublemakers at the back of the room. Jason, Marco, and Dylan had a reputation for pushing limits, and today, something in their eyes told her they had planned more than just mischief. As the students packed away their belongings, the trio casually sauntered over, smirking with that infuriating mix of arrogance and amusement. Jason leaned against the edge of her desk, crossing his arms. "Hey, Teach," he drawled, his tone dripping with mockery. "We were just wondering, how do you expect us to actually care about this boring stuff if it's so useless?" His friends snickered, and a few other students peeked over from their desks, sensing the brewing tension. Mrs. Thompson's lips pressed into a thin line, her mind racing. She could call them out, yell, or send them to the principal's office, but she knew that wouldn't teach them anything. She inhaled slowly, letting her calmness show, and then took a step closer, her eyes locking on Jason's with quiet authority. "I've asked that question before," she said, her voice steady, "and I've waited for answers that matter. I think today, you might be the ones to teach me something." The boys exchanged confused glances. Marco tilted his head, curiosity momentarily replacing his usual smugness. "Teach you something," he repeated, his voice laced with skepticism. Dylan snorted, clearly unimpressed, but the others in the class leaned in slightly, sensing the unusual turn of events. Mrs. Thompson walked around the desk, slowing her steps deliberately, making sure every student could see her calm, unshaken demeanor. She picked up a piece of chalk and wrote 3 words on the board: respect. Choices. Consequences. Turning back to face them, she said, "Every action we take carries weight. You can push, you can tease, or you can rise above and do something meaningful." Her gaze swept across the room, resting briefly on each of the troublemakers. "I want to know, which will you choose today?" For a moment, the class was silent. Even Jason's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. Nobody expected this, and for the first time, the trio realized they had underestimated their teacher. The confidence they had wielded like a weapon was now caught off guard, facing a calm but unshakable challenge. Then, without warning, Jason shuffled back, lowering his arms. Marco and Dylan mirrored him, the 3 of them standing quietly, unsure how to respond. The room felt heavier with anticipation. Mrs. Thompson didn't press further, she simply waited, letting the silence do what words often could not. And in that quiet, the message was clear: control, dignity, and respect weren't things you demanded, they were things you earned. The entire class, watching this unexpected standoff, held their breath. Even the usual chatter, the snickers, and whispers stopped. One small move, one composed response, had shifted the energy in the room entirely. What had started as intimidation now felt like a lesson none of them would forget. The silence stretched, deep and reflective, as Mrs. Thompson simply smiled, calm and unwavering, waiting for the boys to realize that sometimes, the greatest power wasn't in force, it was in restraint. The following day, the atmosphere in the classroom was noticeably different. The tension that had lingered yesterday had shifted into cautious curiosity. Mrs. Thompson stood at the front, arranging papers with her usual meticulous care, while students filed in quietly, whispers barely audible. Even Jason, Marco, and Dylan moved with a strange hesitancy, their usual swagger subdued. It was as if the previous day's confrontation had left an invisible mark on them, and now they were unsure how to reclaim their usual bravado. As the lesson began, Mrs. Thompson introduced a group activity, pairing students in unexpected combinations. Jason and Marco were reluctantly teamed together with Sarah and Liam, 2 of the most diligent students in the class. The troublemaker's eyes widened, clearly annoyed at having to work with students who actually cared about schoolwork. "This is ridiculous," Jason muttered under his breath, but Mrs. Thompson's glance from the front of the room silenced him immediately. As the activity progressed, it became clear that Sarah and Liam were well prepared and focused. Jason tried to cut corners, leaning back in his chair, half-heartedly scribbling answers, but Marco, who had been quietly observing, nudged him sharply. "Come on, man. Just try. It's not like anyone's gonna stop you if you actually do some work," he whispered. Dylan, sitting at another table, caught Jason's eye and smirked, expecting the usual rolling of eyes or a snide remark, but Jason's expression was different, hesitant, almost thoughtful. Mrs. Thompson circulated the room, offering guidance and quietly observing each group. When she reached Jason's table, she didn't scold or criticize. Instead, she leaned slightly closer and said, "I see potential here. All I'm asking is for you to try. Sometimes effort is the first step to respect, both for yourself and others." Her words, soft but unwavering, seemed to pierce through Jason's usual defenses. He looked at Sarah and Liam, who nodded encouragingly, then at Marco, who shrugged in quiet acknowledgement. Something shifted in that moment. Jason picked up his pencil with a newfound determination, and soon, the group was working together more effectively than anyone had expected. By the end of the period, the assignment was completed with surprising quality. Mrs. Thompson stood at the front, smiling genuinely. "See what happens when we choose effort over avoidance?" she asked. The class, previously skeptical, nodded along, impressed by the transformation in the troublemakers. Jason, Marco, and Dylan didn't say much, but there was a quiet pride in their posture, a subtle acknowledgement that they had done something worthwhile without defiance or disruption. As the bell rang, signaling the end of class, the boys packed up slowly, almost reluctantly leaving the table. Something unspoken had changed. The class had witnessed it, a small but meaningful victory, one achieved not through intimidation or rebellion, but through a simple choice to try. Mrs. Thompson's calm authority had not only silenced defiance but had quietly encouraged growth, planting a seed that might one day grow into real change. Even as the students filed out, the classroom buzzed, not with chaos, but with a new energy, a sense that respect and effort could coexist even in the most unlikely places. And in the back of the room, Jason glanced at his friends, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, silently acknowledging that yesterday had been the first day of something different, something better. The next week, the classroom carried a subtle but unmistakable shift. The whispers and jokes that once punctuated every lesson had quieted, replaced by an attentive energy. Jason, Marco, and Dylan no longer lounged in the back, arms crossed, plotting mischief. Instead, they were present, if not fully engaged, at least watching and listening. It was a change so small that some students barely noticed it, but Mrs. Thompson did. She recognized that real change started quietly, often without fanfare, and she intended to nurture it. That day, she announced a new challenge, a debate on a topic that had divided opinions among the students for weeks. Each group was to present arguments, counter-arguments, and a final summary. The boys' table groaned audibly. Public speaking was never their strength, and now they were being asked to defend a position in front of the entire class. Mrs. Thompson, however, maintained her calm demeanor. "Remember," she said, "it's not about winning or losing, it's about preparation, respect for ideas, and listening as much as speaking." Jason, Marco, and Dylan reluctantly joined their assigned group, and the preparation began. Sarah, ever patient, guided them through structuring their points, while Liam encouraged them to think critically. At first, the boys struggled, offering vague statements and half-hearted arguments. But then something remarkable happened. Jason paused, glanced at his notes, and suggested an idea that caught everyone off guard. Marco backed him up, and even Dylan, usually the most resistant, contributed a thoughtful point. When the debate started, the class watched in surprise. Jason spoke first, his voice steady and clear, presenting a point that was concise and well-reasoned. Marco added examples, and Dylan, still hesitant, managed a counterpoint that actually impressed the room. The usual laughter, teasing, and snickering were gone. In their place was attentive silence. Mrs. Thompson smiled quietly from her desk, letting the boys take the stage without interruption. By the time the debate concluded, the class erupted, not in laughter or mockery, but in genuine applause. Even students who had doubted the boys' abilities were impressed. Jason, Marco, and Dylan exchanged glances, a mix of disbelief and pride flashing across their faces. For the first time, they realized that respect wasn't something forced through intimidation, it could be earned through effort, creativity, and courage. Mrs. Thompson finally spoke, her voice calm but filled with warmth. "See what happens when you choose to rise to a challenge instead of tearing others down. Today, you all showed that change is possible, even when it feels difficult." The boys sat back, a quiet sense of accomplishment settling over them. They didn't boast, they didn't smirk, they simply absorbed the lesson. For the rest of the day, the classroom felt different. Even the rowdiest students seemed to carry themselves with more thoughtfulness, inspired by what they had witnessed. And as the bell rang, signaling the end of class, Jason lingered at his desk, glancing at Mrs. Thompson with a newfound respect. Something inside him had shifted, a recognition that power and influence could come from knowledge, composure, and the courage to do what was right. The silence that had once been intimidating was now a silence of reflection, a quiet acknowledgement that lessons often extend far beyond textbooks, and that true strength sometimes comes from the choices we make when no one is pushing us to act. The following Monday, the classroom had settled into a rhythm that was almost unrecognizable from weeks before. The air, once charged with teasing and tension, now carried a quiet focus. Mrs. Thompson moved among the desks with her usual grace, handing out graded assignments and offering brief words of encouragement to each student. Even Jason, Marco, and Dylan approached her desk without hesitation, their usual bravado replaced with a subtle but growing confidence. That day, Mrs. Thompson had planned an unexpected exercise, a reflection circle. Students were asked to share a moment from the previous week when they had acted with thoughtfulness or had learned something new from a challenge. A few students hesitated, unsure how to begin, but the boys surprised everyone. Jason spoke first, recounting the debate. "I never thought I'd actually care about school stuff," he admitted, his voice steady but tinged with sincerity. "But standing up there, I realized it's kinda satisfying to do something right, not just to mess around." Marco followed, admitting that he had been skeptical at first, but now he felt proud of contributing in a meaningful way. Dylan, quiet until now, simply nodded, then added, "It's weird, I thought showing respect was weak. Turns out, it makes people actually listen to you." The class sat in stunned silence for a moment. No one had expected the troublemakers to speak with such honesty. Mrs. Thompson's eyes glimmered with pride, her calm guidance proving its worth once again. As the circle continued, other students began sharing their reflections, inspired by the openness and change they had witnessed. The atmosphere shifted from mere academic engagement to a deeper sense of community. Even those who had previously dismissed lessons as boring now seemed to recognize the value in participating fully, not just for grades but for personal growth. Midway through the activity, Mrs. Thompson addressed the entire class. "What you did last week and what you're doing now shows something important," she said, her voice calm but firm. "It takes courage to change, to admit mistakes, and to try something different. True respect and strength aren't about fear, they're about choice." Jason, Marco, and Dylan exchanged a look, an unspoken understanding passing between them. The power dynamics in the classroom had shifted. They were no longer just the troublemakers, they had begun to earn genuine respect from their peers. The silence that fell after Mrs. Thompson's words wasn't awkward or tense, it was thoughtful, reflective, and full of possibility. By the end of class, students left with a lighter, more confident step. Even the boys lingered at their desks for a moment, glancing at Mrs. Thompson with a quiet appreciation. They had discovered something far more valuable than just avoiding punishment, they had discovered the strength in effort, in respect, and in choosing to act differently. As the door closed behind the last student, Mrs. Thompson stood at the front of the room, a faint smile on her face. The classroom was no longer just a place for lessons in math or grammar, it had become a place where character was tested, shaped, and strengthened. And for the first time in a long time, she felt certain that her students, even the ones who had once seemed impossible to reach, were beginning to understand what it truly meant to grow.